everybody, this is Michael from Systems of Human Performance. Today what we have in store is a book analysis, and the book that we're going to be talking about is this book here. It's a beautiful cover. It's called The Maintenance of Everything by Stewart Brand. It was published in 2025, and if you've followed anything that I do, you'll typically know that I like older books. I like books kind of in the turn of the 20th century or mid-century. But I was in a bookstore the other day and I saw this cover and I said, wow, that's a beautiful cover. And the topic, maintenance of everything, that seems like something maybe I should pick up and read. So that's what we're going to be covering today. What I want to do is look at it through a couple lenses, but most importantly, the lens that I want to analyze this book through is a framework which we've already discussed quite a bit on Systems of Human Performance. And that framework is the SRK framework, which is a way to understand cognition and human errors as it relates to doing activities. The SRK framework stands for Skills, Rules, Knowledge, and the whole premise of the SRK framework is essentially different circumstances and behaviors require different levels of cognitive participation. And what we're going to see throughout this book is different vignettes and different stories of where that comes from. Before we jump into that analysis, I want to do a couple things. I want to introduce who this author is, and I want to remind you and thank you that this is a paid-only video. So if you're watching this in the summer, thank you for your patronage, and I'm trying to do my best to give you something that really delivers value to you. So I really appreciate that. As I mentioned, this book is written by a guy named Stewart Brand. Now, Stewart is something from the boomer generation, and actually I liked much of this book in the first half much more than the latter half because I felt like he kind of ran into these old boomer tropes that we're just kind of tired at that time. You know, he's doing the hippie thing, he's doing the VW bus thing. So the book in its entirety, I would say, you know, the first half is far better than the other half. But I think that's actually because Stewart has a very long legacy as a subject matter expert that he's trying to draw upon. And in some instances, he's drawing upon familiar examples, which for me didn't really resonate. But really, he started his career kind of in the 70s and 80s as an environmentalist and as somebody who was, for lack of a better term, he was just a long-term thinker. He's written several books, including How Buildings Learn, and essentially what his whole MO is that we need to be thinking longer term about our civilization, about technology, about the decisions we make now, and how they will affect us later on. So that ethos is very, very welcome in my worldview, and to me, he echoes a lot of the same thoughts as Lewis Mumford, who is one of my favorite philosophers of technology. The big idea of this book is a little bit of a shift from that kind of long now thinking. Instead, what this book is really about is doing a deep dive into maintenance, what it is, and why it is required for civilizations, right? We can't just set it and forget it in all of our technologies. We have to be active in what we do from a maintenance standpoint to keep these things running, to keep buildings erected, and to be able to do efficiently that which we do today. If we just accept technology as is and is part of the world that we enter into, and we ascribe no responsibility to that, well, then we're actually going to fall into a state of disrepair very, very quickly. So, and I think that was maybe one of the first points that I really, really liked about this book right out of the get-go, is how he frames what maintenance is I found very alluring. I liked it quite a bit. To him, maintenance is not just like repair, and it's not just, wiping things down with oil. To him, he defined maintenance as almost like the full life cycle of any technology or equipment. So that would require, turning it on properly, the initiation process. I was just doing some home repairs, and I have a backflow preventer, a very heavy-duty plumbing device, and there's a whole instructions about how to turn it on properly to make sure you have a vacuum seal, which I found rather interesting, and Stewart accurately depicts in this book. So it's about initiating technology correctly, and then repairing it and cleaning it and oiling it, replacing it, even moving parts, and then eventually disposing of it and replacing it with something else. So I really liked that. It was kind of a philosophy of maintenance that he's bringing forth in this book right from the get-go. And a lot of what his book gets into is not just the wrench doing the work of maintenance, but all of the other things, the observation, the diagnosis, the anticipation, the learning, the resources that you have available to prepare yourself to do maintenance. So I really liked that kind of philosophy of what maintenance is, and how it relates to our technological world. We typically think of maintenance as kind of a repair task, or maybe like a lubrication and cleaning task, but we very rarely think of maintenance as a necessary part of the life cycle. Stewart gives several instances throughout the book, and the book's actually painted kind of more of vignettes of stories, but he pulls out lots of different opportunities to learn in these vignettes. And so he'll talk about, there's this Golden Globe yacht race in the 1960s, and people who have not used the outbound motors found that they're corroded over from all the sea salt. So a good part of maintenance is just running the thing from time to time, making things that move, making sure that they can still move. And it's just almost like a stewardship of equipment, of machines, that Stewart brings forth in his book about maintenance. Now, like I said, I was going to talk a little bit about the SRK framework as it relates to this book. So if we want to do a deep dive into the SRK framework, maybe not a deep dive, but we'll cover it briefly, and I'll put a link to some of the articles I've written in the past about the SRK framework. But essentially what we have is skills, rules, and knowledge. And skills are essentially like your muscle memories, the things that you can do without thinking about. And there's different types of human errors that are associated with skills, typically slips and lapses. So, for instance, if I'm driving on the freeway and I miss my exit, and then I notice it just as I pass it, right? Well, that's some sort of a lapse type error. And that is because I missed kind of the trigger, the signal that tell me to get off the exit. And I was so automatic that I actually missed where my next decision point was in my process. The other one, slips, are caused by doing the wrong thing, even though you intended to do the right thing. So if you've ever cut yourself chopping vegetables by accident, that's a slip. You intended to chop the vegetable, you missed, and you chopped your hand. The famous Freudian slip is another one, where you meant to say one thing, but you actually said something else, right? So you're not thinking about language, you're just talking, but slips tend to happen. So that skill-based layer requires the least amount of cognition, the least amount of brain requirement. Next up on the scale is rules, and these typically require a little bit of cognition, a little bit of participation from your mind, but generally what we're trying to do is we're trying to ascribe a rule to the situation. So in this instance, the rules are mostly about identifying the situation and then trying to retrieve from your memory a rule that fits that situation. So in this case, errors typically occur because of mistakes. Either we have observed incorrectly what our environment is and then grabbed a rule that did not fit to that environment, or we've used a rule that is not really a good rule. So for instance, if I say, hey, I'm going to fill up my tank every time I go to the gas station, I'm going to put $20 in it. Well, that's a rule, and it will serve me for a long time. But as conflicts in the Middle East change, as oil prices tend to rise and gasoline prices tend to rise, all of a sudden that rule now becomes deficient, and it's not getting me as far as it once did. So we can see that there's types of errors based on rules as well. And then lastly, we have knowledge. And knowledge requires the most amount of cognition. And the only time we really use knowledge, believe it or not, is in novel and new circumstances. And in these circumstances, what we typically do is we draw on our past experiences and our past understanding and frameworks of how things work, and then we try to apply them to this new and novel situation. And oftentimes, this sort of error has kind of the guess and check mentality. Is I don't know what's going to work or what's not going to work. I have an idea based on my past knowledge, my past experiences, but I'm not going to know until I put it into practice and see the results of it. So that is the SRK framework. And again, the error form of knowledge is if the thing actually doesn't work, right? It's because I'm not drawing the correct knowledge, or I don't have the correct knowledge for this new and novel situation. Now, as I was reading this book, I saw this play out many, many times, and I'll give you just a couple examples. The first one was they were talking about the Golden Globe yacht race, which took place in the 1960s. There were a couple people trying to sail the world in a yacht without stopping to port ever. So all of their resources, all of their food provisions, everything was kept on board. And they sailed for about 10 months alone by themselves. And of course, there's all kinds of repairs that will have to occur. So in some instances, these are routine repairs, right? And they're probably fall under, I'll say the word routine because that's kind of like the rule, right? If this happens, then do this. If my sail rips, then I need to mend it, right? If my outbound motor jams up, then I need to disassemble it and clean it and oil it and lubricate it. Okay, but sometimes in these vignettes, very novel situations happened where in one instance the wooden ship had a leak under the waterline, so it required the sailor to jump into the water and tack on some metal plates to prevent it from seeping water. And what the author, Stewart, talks about is how when this sailor approached this problem, he didn't do anything for several days. He thought about what actions he could take and how he might take it, and what could help him achieve this repair correctly, most efficaciously. And in this case, it falls directly into that question of knowledge, right? Is when you're dealing with new and novel situations, you need to have time to reflect on your experiences and to anticipate what these actions are going to do, because they don't fall into things that we do with muscle memory, and they don't fall into subroutines that we have in our head that can kind of get us through and game us through our lives. So that was a really good take that I thought Stewart Brand pulled out of these vignettes. In another instance, another yachtsman, the whole front bow of his ship had broken, and he needed to align it to get it back up so that the ship would not roll over or sail truly. And again, the yachtsman took several days to think about how he might approach solving this before he actually went ahead and tried to solve the problem. Again, a great example of people relying on this knowledge framework of anticipating results based on past experiences and knowledge. One of the other big things that I liked about this book was Stewart's focus on simplicity. And in a couple instances, he talks about this with the yachtsmen, where he's comparing and contrasting different sailors and their approaches to maintenance. Some of these people have highly engineered ships that require lots of technical knowledge, and they're actually not the ones who won the Golden Globe race, but it was actually the people who simplified their ships, who, to use the SRK framework, who made as much of the maintenance and much of the reliability as possible fall into these skills and rules-based cognition so that it's really smooth sailing, right? They can focus on the repairs in a way that they can respond quickly and also not think too difficultly about what might occur. And in one instance, he's talking about the yachtsman who changes the automatic steering system so that it's less complicated and more simplified. So very helpful. In another instance, he compares and contrasts the AK-47, which is kind of the Soviet iron wall machine gun of choice for their small arms machine gun for their military, and he compares and contrasts that to the American-made M16. And the American-made M16 is full of precision parts. It works flawlessly in a lab. It has a better fire rate. It exceeds expectations in almost all of the performance dimensions until you actually take it out into the field. And then this precision and this sophistication actually becomes cumbersome, actually becomes a liability for the soldiers because it's always going to jam and they can never keep it clean, and it requires so much precision and sophistication that you simply can't attain out in the field. Contrast that to something like the AK-47, which is actually built very loose. There's very high tolerances. There's very high tolerances, not tight tolerances, but very loose tolerances on all of the parts. And this allows this small arms gun to be fired in any and all conditions, whether it's wet, whether it's dry, whether it's hot, whether it's cold. And obviously, our adversaries in the West have chosen the AK-47 as the preferred small arms fire for many of those reasons, is it's simply a better gun when it gets into combat situations. He also takes that same idea of simplicity and applies it to automotive manufacturing. And he compares and contrasts Rolls-Royce, which I was amazed to find out in the early 1900s, a Rolls-Royce was driving around Europe for 80,000 miles without any maintenance aside from, blown tires. When we think about the assembly line and we relate that to what we see in the SRK framework, the ability for Henry Ford to scale production really relies on the ability to capture those routines that fall into either the skills, the motor skills, the skills that require very little cognition, and the rules, the things that we can game through life by saying, if we do this, then we do this. And of course, by mass producing the Model T, creating the assembly line, which of course he stole from the meat packing plants in Chicago, we can see that what he's done, what he turned into essentially the American industrial mode of production, really relies on those first two parts of the SRK framework. Now, again, Rolls-Royce is not hurting for money either, and what they have done is they have essentially focused almost exclusively on the rules and the knowledge part of the SRK framework in their mode of production, where they are taking lots of time to precision engineer all of their parts, sometimes even hand fabricating many of these parts to have almost like a craftsmanship or a bespoke vehicle that is going to work far better than any Model T, right? Far better than any Ford vehicle today, probably. But they're doing so at a huge cost to labor and comes with a huge luxury price tag. So, in summary, I think the book is really eye-opening. There's many different topics that kind of fall into small grab bag categories. Maybe I'll talk about them in a different video. It's just kind of a catch-all. So in closing, I liked the book, at least the first part of the book. I thought he was very effective in how he told his stories through a number of vignettes, and also comparing and contrasting a lot of the different approaches and technologies as it relates to production, as it relates to repair and maintenance. So, as I said, the book is called Maintenance of Everything by Stuart Brand. It is a fabulous, beautiful cover and well worth the read.